Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice.
With the meteoric rise of the newest gothy teen actress Jenna Ortega, Hollywood obviously had to find a way to capitalize off of her even more. After Wednesday, they didn't have to look very far to find a similar character which she could perfectly embody, Lydia Deeds. But cleverly enough, the producers understood that a big part of Beetlejuice's success and legacy is the fact that it is very clearly a product of the 80s. People love the old school special effects and the quirky characters. So instead of flopping at the box office by creating a remake, they decided to go for a sequel,
which famously always does very well.
And this way they can draw audiences in even more by having the old gang revisit their characters. Now, as much as I'm bored of the never-ending recycling of known properties, I've gotta admit, this is a good marketing strategy. The premise of Lydia having a kid, plus the nostalgic A-listers that are tied to this project, are bound to cause a wave of intrigue.
And as a small YouTuber, I'm going to take a page out of Hollywood's book and ride that wave. I mean, it would be stupid not to, seeing Beetlejuice fits perfectly into my niche, comparing musical adaptations to their films.
The 1988 cult classic received a musical adaptation in Washington, D.C. in 2018 before opening on Broadway in 2019. Like all adaptations, the work got slightly altered to best suit the musical theatre medium, but writers Scott Brown and Anthony King decided to take it a step further. Inspired by the bold and genre-bending style of the original film, they decided to incorporate the storytelling technique that made Beetlejuice the success that it was: subverting expectations. According to Fiveable, the definition for subverting expectations is a storytelling technique where a narrative leads the audience to anticipate a certain outcome, only to deliver a surprising twist that challenges or completely alters those expectations. A movie about a haunting poltergeist sounds like a textbook horror film. Except Beetlejuice is equally a comedy, and even has some fantasy elements. This mix of genre allows the cult film to constantly turn the narrative upside down. When Lydia meets ghosts, the last thing we expect from a teenage girl is for her to befriend them. When the guests at the dinner party get possessed, we all thought they would be furious, but then it turns out they actually love the experience and want to sell it. Heck, even the opening shot of the film instantly subverts expectation by having Adam gently pick up the huge-ass spider, what a brave man, and set it free.
I don't know about you guys, but that's definitely not how I would react if there was a spider like that on my town model. Okay? I would cry.
The musical adaptation writers Brown and King fully embraced this technique and decided to use the fact that Beetlejuice is such a well-known cult classic to lead audiences astray and subvert their expectations.
So in essence, they're subverting the subversion. Is that a word?
This departure from the source material probably pissed off some purists, but given its growing amount of tours and international productions, I think it's safe to say that the risk paid off. This probably because they struck the perfect balance between straying away from Tim Burton's masterpiece while still conveying the same essence. If anything, I think they even improved parts of the narrative.
Only parts though, the end is a bit of a mess, but we'll get to that.
By really honing in on the themes and making the story more cohesive, Beetlejuice the musical delivers a more concise narrative.
What? Anne thinks a musical adaptation surpasses its original movie? Yes, okay, that does seem to be the conclusion to every single one of my videos, but that's because I want to change the preconceived notions that people have surrounding musical theater. I want to highlight why musical theater is such an underrated art form. Spread the good vibes, you know?
Beetlejuice the musical is a perfect example of the incredible skills musical theater writers have. Due to the limitations of live theater and usually the need to trim down the plot to make space for songs, the writers need to concentrate the story to its core without losing its essence. Multiple dinner parties get merged into one, character goals get defined more clearly, reoccurring themes deliver a satisfying conclusion. Not only do the writers need to rethink a lot of the narrative, they also need to reimagine the whole show to make the material shine in this new medium.
And when they succeed, boy oh boy, it truly is magical. And when they don't, they try to save it by adding in a flying car.
So today, let's take a look at exactly how Scott Brown and Anthony King managed to successfully put a new spin on the beloved cult movie, Beetlejuice. The first biggest change in the musical is that Lydia is now our protagonist. In the film, we follow the story of how ordinary couple Adam and Barbara Maitland die and learn the ropes of the afterlife. Lydia obviously still plays a major part in the film, but the story beats are definitely structured around Adam and Barbara's learning process. Making Lydia the protagonist has giant implications for the timeline of the story. Instead of starting the story off with how the Maitlands die, the musical opens with Lydia's backstory, her mom's funeral. Besides informing us that Lydia is now our protagonist, this scene explains why Lydia is so dark and moody, why the Dietzes are moving house, plus we immediately know two of the main themes, death and family. In the musical, we only learn about Adam and Barbara's demise in the third song. But this isn't the only scene that gets moved around due to our new POV. For example, the whole scene in the Netherworld with Miss Argentina, which happens not long after the Dietzes move in the film, only happens in Act 2 of the musical. And in the musical, it is Lydia and her father who make the trip to the Netherworld, not the Maitlands. There are also some scenes that get moved quite a bit forward in the musical, namely the scenes where Beetlejuice meets the Maitlands and Lydia. But that shift has less to do with Lydia being our protagonist and more with Beetlejuice's role in the musical. Lydia's first song, a beautiful ballad named Invisible, is abruptly brought to an end by the reveal of Beetlejuice.
Already?
Yes, writers Brown and King decided to throw the film's mysterious build-up to Beetlejuice's reveal out of the window and gave him the role of the narrator in this version. Which means that we meet him straight away. He even addresses the departure from the source material. This type of breaking the fourth wall can sometimes feel a bit gimmicky, but works incredibly well with an unpredictable character such as Beetlejuice. And it tells the audience straight away that there are more surprises in store. In his introduction song, The Whole Being Dead Thing, Beetlejuice sets the darker, sarcastic tone of the show and showcases his chaotic approach to the role of narrator. And to make sure that absolutely nobody in the audience expects a literal copy of the film, Beetlejuice burns the handbook for the recently deceased. Which at first is like, alright, it's to show us that he's a rule breaker, he literally destroys the rulebook. But when you really think about it, the handbook is a crucial element in multiple plot points of the film. It allows Adam and Barbara to go to the Netherworld, they find Beetlejuice's flyer in there, Otho uses it to summon Adam and Barbara. How are the writers going to make any of that work without the handbook? Or will it all just be scrapped? A simple toss in the fireplace brings about a lot of intrigue. The writers keep using the fact that the film is so well known as a tool to tease the audience. For example, Adam and Barbara's section in the musical starts off with Adam coming home and Barbara asking if there was any traffic on the bridge.
Wink, wink.
So we can already assume that our lovebirds will meet their end in a different manner in this adaptation. But how? The musical makes sure to incorporate all the random details from the film and give them purpose. The tongue oil is actually bought to oil a crib. The random phone call turns out to be the person who the crib will go to. All of this perfectly sets up the Maitland song Ready, Set, Not Yet, where they discuss not feeling ready for parenthood. The song culminates in them saying they are ready for the next step, and as they take one, they both fall through the floor.
What the? I actually genuinely didn't see that one coming. How fun would it have been though if they would pay homage to the original death scene by somehow still involving the dog? Like, I don't know, maybe the dog can be standing on the floorboard that they're like dangling on to nonchalantly step off it to send them to their deaths. Although I admit they would have needed some cursed child level theater magic to make it happen, but it would have been the ultimate callback.
When the Dietzes move into Adam and Barbara's house, we get a classic film-to-musical adaptation solution. Two characters merge into one. In the Heathers musical, Martha and Betty become one person, and in Legally Blonde, Vivian takes on Professor Stromwell's part. In Beetlejuice, the two characters that get merged are Delia and Otto.
Or so I thought.
Delia is still this artsy lady, but she is now also quite spiritual. In the film, Delia completely dismisses Lydia's supernatural stories. Scrapping Otho from that first scene in the house and giving Delia some of his attributes convinced me that she had absolved his character. She does still mention that he is her mentor, but that just felt like a nice little Easter egg for the fans. But my wiseacre attitude came crashing down when Otho does in fact show up in the second act. Every fan obviously assumes that this is because he will after all host the seance where Adam and Barbara nearly get exorcised. But then the writers double bluff us again by making Lydia the one who exorcises Barbara. So we went from bluff, Otho isn't part of the show, to double bluff, he is a part of the show, to triple bluff, he's actually pointless.
Like, genuinely, his character is of no actual relevance to the plot anymore.
Yes, okay, he brings the soul box, but Delia could have easily brought that with her after the Deo haunting.
By the way, Beetlejuice the musical is now also performed on cruise ships, and so I really want to know if the big Deo haunting set pieces are still part of it, or even like the Sandworm. Like, is that possible on a cruise ship? Surely they don't have that much like storage space. Do they have alternatives? Like, how does that work? Does anyone know? Has anyone seen it? Please comment down below. I'm always very interested in like the logistical side of these things.
Now, I'm willing to admit that perhaps this double bluff of supposedly merging Otho and Delia's characters to them bringing him in anyway was in fact not a double bluff, but just me overthinking things. I guess if I would have written this musical adaptation, I would have chosen to either fully incorporate Otho or to cut him out. Now his character is very much simply a device to subvert the seance expectation, which is fine, but does kind of feel like an afterthought to pander to the audience.
Because the musical is Lydia's story, Delia... Curse the person who named these characters.
Delia is not straight away Charles's new wife in the musical. The writers saw an opportunity and made the announcement of Charles and Delia's engagement a plot point to advance Lydia's character journey. To justify Delia being around this much before being engaged, the musical makes her Lydia's life coach. Whilst we're on the topic of Delia, anybody else thinks the intro of her song No Reason sounds super similar to Shape of You by Ed Sheeran? Never realized the marimba had such a chokehold on the late 2010s music scene. In the original film, Beetlejuice is a big creep who's attracted to a minor. So much so that he blackmails Lydia into marrying him. This wedding being quite an iconic plot point tied to the equally iconic outfits obviously had to be a part of the musical. No way around that. But the writers chose to make it very PG. Instead of Beetlejuice forcing her to marry him because of his PDF file instincts, he makes it very clear from the get-go that the marriage is a pure logistical thing. He needs to marry a living person to become alive. This is also part of the reason why he marries her in the film, but in the musical they make it very clear that Beetlejuice has no other motives. He never makes any inappropriate remarks about Lydia, and the two of them actually build up a sort of friendship. But to make the writers' opinions 100% clear about this plot point, they added the song My Creepy Old Guy, where the women sarcastically sing about how much they love creepy old guys.
I'm really glad that the writers went above and beyond to convey this message, because the first time I saw the original film, I swear to God, that part really threw me off. Like, to the point that I wanted to turn off the TV. Poor little Winona. It's always been sexualized. I just want to protect her, you know?
In the musical, Beetlejuice and Lydia actually get married, which felt like the ultimate WTF moment. But then it quickly turns out that it is yet again a double bluff when Lydia instantly kills him. Although I like that the writers pushed beyond the expectation and actually have the pair get married, I have to say that the killing felt very rushed. I wish there were some seeds planted to foreshadow the way she kills him. Would make that moment feel a bit more earned. Like I said, Beetlejuice and Lydia actually form a connection in the musical. This because the writers gave them the same struggle, feeling invisible. Now I have to admit that I'm not the biggest fan of humanizing Beetlejuice this much. This choice is necessary to make the big plot twist at the end work, where Beetlejuice turns out to be the hero and saves Lydia, but that whole scene could have used a couple more rewrites for me. The jumping from one plot twist to another gives me improv vibes. It's just not believable that Beetlejuice would save Lydia's life after she literally just killed him.
Like, are we just subverting the expectation for the sake of subverting it here?
Juno, Adam and Barbara's caseworker in the film, makes a promotion and becomes the director of the Netherworld Customs and Processing in the musical. This is purely due to the fact that it is now Lydia and her father who go to the Netherworld and not Adam and Barbara. Juno brings with her another plot twist that I wasn't so sure of. She is actually Beetlejuice's mother. In the film, Juno describes Beetlejuice as her old assistant, but in an attempt to last minute make someone else the antagonist that needs to die, the musical reveals that Juno is in fact the horrible mother that Beetlejuice has mentioned a few times. Sure. I don't think I really need to explain why this death doesn't feel nearly as satisfying as Beetlejuice's death in the film.
Juno is such a side character. Like, how am I meant to feel any pleasure from her death? I barely know her.
Long before the Fremen claimed ownership of the Sandworm, Beetlejuice already released this majestic animal onto the world. In the film, we see the Sandworm in Saturn, the desert world outside of Adam and Barbara's house. But because the musical decides to get rid of the few scenes that take place in Saturn, the writers had to find other ways to incorporate the beast into the narrative. As good students, the writers used the rule of 3.
Of course, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice.
They find 3 moments to weave the worm into the story. Well, I guess there's a bonus 4th one because the paper Beetlejuice is reading at the start features an article about sandworms, but 85% of the audience won't be able to read that. True fans will probably fill in the blanks and understand that it is a callback to the paper in the film, but still, it's too subtle to count as one of the 3 moments. Number 1 is at the top of the show, where in the chaos of Beetlejuice's opening number, the whole being dead thing, a sandworm comes on stage and grabs one of the funeral guests.
Random AF, but that's exactly why it works so well in this song.
Having the sandworm make its first real appearance there is such a genius move. It's the culmination of the madness of the song, whilst pandering to the audience, whilst planting a seed for a future plot point.
I love layered writing.
The second moment where we see the sandworm is early on in Act 2, when Beetlejuice is explaining the rules of being a ghost to Lydia. Rule number 1, he says, is to never leave the house. When she then asks why, he opens the front door and a giant sandworm pokes its head in. Beetlejuice warns Lydia about the sandworms because they eat ghosts, and then turns to the audience and cheekily says, foreshadowing, leading the audience on to believe that the scene in the film where Beetlejuice gets eaten by a sandworm is still part of the musical. To then subvert that expectation with the third moment and have the sandworm actually eat Juno and Beetlejuice riding the sandworm. Subverting audiences' expectation has become a classic storytelling technique because people love being taken by surprise. Heck, M. Night Shyamalan even built a whole career on it. But there is one golden rule that the writers must employ to make sure this approach stays effective. The story that is eventually told needs to be superior to the one being subverted.
So basically make sure that the story you end up telling is better than the one the audience initially thought they were receiving.
Something easier said than done. Like I said at the start of the video, I believe that Beetlejuice the musical has in many ways improved the original narrative. But to me, it seems like these many changes were applied without keeping the golden rule in mind. The original ending is very satisfying because Beetlejuice, the main antagonist, gets eaten by a sandworm. This is a good twist because the film is primarily a horror, so a happy ending was definitely not guaranteed, and because the sandworm was introduced to the audience as something scary and evil, so it makes the ending more fulfilling to learn that Barbara has dominated it and uses it to kill Beetlejuice.
The sweet taste of redemption.
The musical implements the same tactic but changes one very important element, the antagonist. Now, instead of Beetlejuice, Juno is the one to get eaten by the sandworm, changing the narrative from bad guys deserve to die to bad moms deserve to die. Something which feels a little tone deaf given the whole story is about Lydia grieving her mom. What's the message here? Lydia's mom deserved to die? Now, I'm sure that wasn't the writer's intention, but I feel like their attempt to mirror Beetlejuice and Lydia, mixed with this absolute need for a redemption arc for Beetlejuice, ends up undermining everything they set up so far. I think Beetlejuice should have stayed the main antagonist. The last-minute switcheroo of antagonists provides a lukewarm resolution, and it is in stark contrast with the theme of family. Sure, Beetlejuice the musical is more about chosen family than actual blood relatives. Lydia becomes a kind of surrogate child for the Maitlands, Delia is fully accepted into the Dietz family. But instead of then fully driving that message home by having Beetlejuice stay with the Dietzes/Maitlands, he leaves. He says his goodbyes and off he goes. Sayonara.
If you're not even gonna give him a satisfying ending, then you might as well just keep him as the main antagonist and kill him off.
This is where I feel the writers veer into the territory of subverting expectations just for the sake of it, which is such a shame seeing all the previous twists felt very carefully considered. But alas, they stumbled on the final hurdle and fell for the subversion trap. Not even a chaotic character such as Beetlejuice could rectify this complete miss of what could have been a home run.
Even though I end my essay on somewhat of a bad note, I just wanted to clarify that I really like Beetlejuice the musical and I am anxiously awaiting a West End transfer. For me, what makes a musical adaptation successful is when it's clear that the writers love the material so much that their only goal is to tell the story in the best way possible.
Beetlejuice the musical, despite its many departures from the original, is chock full of callbacks to the film. Some moments are literal copies from the movie, such as Barbara noticing the fire wasn't on when they left the house and then burning her fingers, or how Delia starts the Deo haunting, to other elements being reimagined to still find a place in the new version. I'm thinking of the baseball team in the Netherworld that gets deployed to chase Lydia in the musical, or the snakehead that gets repurposed in That Beautiful Sound, or even an appearance of Shrunken Head Guy.
The writers tried to naturally fit in as much of the original as possible, not for the sake of pandering to the audience, at least it didn't read that way to me, but because they wanted to convey the film's unique charm. My only hope is that the writers of the sequel handle the script with as much love and consideration as King and Brown did. But the reviews so far have not been promising. But what are your thoughts? Do you prefer the movie or do you prefer the musical adaptation? Have you seen the sequel yet? If so, is it good or is it definitely just a cash grab? As always, if you have ideas for any musical adaptations that I should compare to its original film, let me know in the comments. And until next time, stay strange and unusual.